Thank you very much for a wonderful introduction. I'm sorry, like the Japanese, I have to start with an apology. My Tamil is not that good. I understand, but I cannot speak. My Norwegian is even worse. So I'm afraid I will have to speak in English. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be here with you. As you know, the Tamils of Sri Lanka are very close to my heart, and they have been close to my heart for the last 30 years. There are many things that I would like to tell you this evening. It's about this book. But before I start, I just want to say one thing, and that is to express my deepest condolences and sadness about what is happening in Sri Lanka right now as we speak. About 200,000 Tamils are displaced in their own country, facing all kinds of hardship and suffering, as they have been for the last 30 years that I have been covering this conflict. In my personal lifetime, this is yet again another incident where the world does not seem to be bothering about the plight of the Tamils of Sri Lanka. And it is with deep sadness and deep regret that I, as a member of the media, stand here before you and look at how little this conflict is being covered in the world. All I can do today is to express my deepest sadness, and I wish and I hope and I pray that the suffering will end soon. Coming to this book, I don't know about you, but when I was a student in school, I hated history. It was all about mad kings going into wars all the time. And there were one date after another date to study by heart, and you had to remember it. And I couldn't see what was the point of the first battle of Panipat was fought in 1526, and the second battle of Panipat was fought in 1556, and so on and so forth. Who cares? How does it matter to my life today? This was the way history was taught to us. And today, when I am almost 50 years old myself, I realize that history is one of the most important subjects. And why is that? Because we cannot understand our present if we do not know our past. And if we do not understand our present, how on earth are we going to plan for the future? History is what teaches us. And the second thing that I would say about history is that all politicians must be forced to study history before they take politics and before they join the government. The reason this cliche exists that history repeats itself is because politicians have never learned either history or the lessons from history, and therefore they are doomed to repeat the mistakes again and again. And the tragedy is that we, the ordinary civilians, suffer because our politicians don't know their history. Coming to this book, I was in Svalbard actually when the book arrived, and I've just returned from Svalbard about 3 days ago. This is the northernmost inhabited part of the world. I was on an Arctic study tour. So I have to confess that I haven't read the book fully, but like all journalists, that doesn't stop me from talking about it. I would say, before I say a few words about the book, I want to just say a few words in introduction about myself. I know I was given a very generous introduction over here, and it's true that I have covered Sri Lankan Tamil history from 1981. Actually, perhaps I was just 21 years old at that time, but what happened was I was a reporter already in Madras. It was called Madras, now of course it's Chennai. And the first thing that what got my attention into the Tamil problem was an incident which was one paragraph in the Hindu newspaper back in 1981. And it was one paragraph which said that the Jaffna Public Library was burned down. This was June of 1981. Was burned down by the Sri Lankan security forces. That's all. There was just this one paragraph, and I didn't know anything about Sri Lanka or the Tamils, nothing. I was a young reporter myself, doing all kinds of situations and covering all kinds of riots and violence and all that, but only in India. When I saw this item, I was shocked. I was shocked because, first of all, there was only one paragraph and it didn't give any explanation as to why this had happened. But to me, who had covered by this time a number of riots between Hindus and Muslims in India, our Christians and the Hindus, and I'd covered a lot of violence situations, to me this was shocking that a public library had been burned down. Why? I can understand if, two groups of communities, they fight each other. They were doing that all the time in India, so that's not anything new. But the very fact that the library had been burned down brought to me, to my mind, biblical wars. It brought to me the image of the burning down of the Alexandria library. A library, when it's burned down, is an orchestrated, premeditated act to hit at the very cultural root and identity of a group of people. To me, that was very, very strong. There was something seriously wrong in Sri Lanka and no one in India had any clue about it. And I said, this is something that needs investigation. This is something that needs to be, that I have to follow up. There is something seriously wrong going on over here. And that was how I started. There was very little available in the Indian media, but I started, and remember at that time there was no internet. So everything had to, we had to go and meet people. We had to go to libraries to get books. So I started getting more and more acquainted with the whole situation. And then, of course, the 1983 riots happened, and I was there to cover that event. And my eyewitness accounts did play a certain role in India's official intervention in the problem. But I have to say this, I was always, having been an eyewitness account of what happened to the Tamils in Sri Lanka in July 1983, obviously gave me a profound understanding and sympathy for the plight of the Tamils. But at the same time, being a journalist, it is absolutely vital for me to keep talking to the Sri Lankan leaders, to talk to the Indian leaders. It is very, very important for a journalist to be and to be seen as neutral, because that is the only way that a journalist can have credibility. You have to talk to everybody else. You cannot be identified as just being one person's spokesperson or one community spokesperson. And I always take pride in the fact that at the height, one of the worst times in Sri Lankan history was between 1987 and 1990, when the IPKF was there, because Sri Lanka was coming apart. You had the Tigers fighting the IPKF in the north, and large numbers of Tamil civilians being killed in the north, and the large number of Sinhalese civilians being killed in the south because of the JVP insurrection. It was a time of terrible blood and violence in Sri Lanka. And I felt at that time that I was able to meet all the people in the conflict. I was able to meet Prabhakaran, I was able to meet Rajiv Gandhi, I was able to meet Jayawardene, and I always valued this fact that everybody, even though everybody knew that I was sympathetic to the Tamil cause, it did not stop me from meeting the other people, from trying to explain this problem in its entirety, in its complexity. And that neutrality is something that I really value. It is that neutrality that gives me credibility. So I do look upon everything as a journalist. And as a journalist, it is very important to be skeptical, to apply scrutiny always, never to accept anything at face value. So when I get this book, I look at this book and it says Tamil in Sri Lanka, a comprehensive history, 300 BC to 2000 AD. And my first reaction is, wonderful. This is so needed. This is one of the most important things that is needed for the Tamils of Sri Lanka, for Sri Lanka. Why? Because as you know, history is so controversial in Sri Lanka. One of the first things that I came face to face when I went into Colombo to report was this whole thing about the history of the Tamils in Sri Lanka and then the Sinhalese in Sri Lanka. Who came first? The Sinhalese said they came first, the Tamils said they came first. It was like the chicken and egg problem, who came first? And I had no idea, because I'm not a historian. I'm a journalist. I don't have the expertise to know what is the reality. And from what the Tamils were saying, from what the Sinhalese were saying, to me it seemed like it was so much of legend and myth. I mean, I can go back to Ravana for all, the sense that it makes. Where is historical evidence? I never got a sense that I had any historical evidence by either of the two groups. And so, what does a good journalist do? Leave it aside. This is not a subject. I'm not going to touch this subject. I don't know, and I'm not convinced. Better to stick to the reality. There is plenty to write about it. So, history of this nation, of the Tamils, is not something I ever attempted, simply because there was such a dearth, there was such a shortage of material on this. So my first reaction is, this is excellent. I can't wait to get down to this. As I said, I got this only really 3 days ago, so I have not read the whole thing. So I turn the page and I go into the dedication, and the dedication, it says,